couple of decades ago, when my brother and I first formed Kovar's Karate Center, I was struggling with the marketing and advertising. So I read every possible book I could find on marketing. And there was a common theme, and that common theme was for you to understand and know your customer. To know your customer so well, you could identify, you could imagine your perfect customer. Well, I struggled with this. I know which customers were our favorite to teach, but they were kind of flaky. So I was trying to figure out what my ideal customer was. I'll never forget rounding the corner and seeing a group of students sitting at my brother's feet, listening to him talk about the word of the week. And the image of the mothers sitting on the edge of the bleachers willing their children to pay attention to this philosophy lesson. That was my ideal customer. So the books went on to say, where do your customers live? Where do they shop? What kind of cars do they drive? Get to know your customer in detail. And so I thought, well, where do they live? So I stole my wife's sewing needles, got a map from the gas station, and painstakingly looked up every address for every one of my students and pushed a pin into the map, signifying where they lived. After several weeks of doing this, I came up with a map that looked something like this. There were lots of pins in the map. And then I noticed a pattern, that 80% of my students came within a 3-mile radius of our karate school, and that 90% of our students came within a 5-mile radius. This was important information for me to learn, because at the time, the Sacramento Bee and the local large TV station was pushing me to buy ads on their particular media. The Sacramento Bee bragging about how many millions of households looked at their paper. Same thing with the local television studio. The problem is the vast majority of those people that would see those ads on those mediums lived way outside my 5-mile radius. And any advertising that fell outside my 5-mile radius was wasted money. So then I started wondering, how can I be more effective with my advertising and marketing dollars within that particular area? I learned you can buy the mailing list of magazines. So I thought, wow, that's really interesting. Wonder what kind of magazines my parents, my ideal clients, read. So I went and asked them, what kind of magazines do you read? Sure enough, I came up with a list of magazines, and there were a couple of common magazines that overlooked each other. Yes, Oprah Magazine and Parents. The problem is that everybody who subscribes to Oprah are not my ideal customers, and everybody who subscribes to Parents are not my ideal customers. You see, 80% of my students are children. Let's say 8-year-olds, because really we range from 4 to 12-year-old as a children program, so if we pick 8 as the middle, my ideal client then is an 8-year-old child. But 8-year-olds don't make purchasing decisions. It's their mommies that make purchasing decisions. So really my ideal client is women of children-bearing age who have children. So okay, now how do I find more of those? The other thing that was a significant discriminator is that my karate lessons were very expensive. I knew that everybody that subscribed to these magazines could not also afford my karate lessons. In other words, everybody who got Parents Magazine weren't the perfect socioeconomic mix that would be able to afford my karate lessons. They might have children, but they may not be able to afford me. And so any direct mail piece or any time I would send an ad to those households that could not afford me, that was wasted money, wasted effort. Conversely, everybody who got Oprah Magazine, which is considered a more expensive magazine, wasn't my ideal demographic. In other words, my mother was getting Oprah Magazine. Well, she's not a woman of childbearing age. How can I solve this particular conundrum? So I bought the mailing lists of both these magazines, and I've noticed that there were some overlaps. Not a lot, but there were some overlaps. Oh, that might be my ideal target. Somebody who can afford to buy an expensive magazine like Oprah Magazine, and somebody who's also buying Parents Magazine most likely had kids with the perfect demographic age. So what I then did is I merged and then purged out all the non-duplicates and kept addresses, all the people that were on both lists. And so now I had a highly targeted list of people, and I started using direct mail. And direct mail was a huge boon for me. As a matter of fact, people still use direct mail. How many of you have ever wondered about, wow, don't they realize that there's social media out there, that there's email and other things like that? Why do they still send junk mail to my house? Simply because junk mail works. It's highly targetable, and there's a big response. You're able to get a predictable response for doing junk mail. However, in today's electronic media, much of these same theories hold true. So let's say you wanted to do a Facebook campaign or some other kind of campaign. Do your customers prefer one particular blog, or do they prefer one particular Facebook group? What circles do they run in? Where do they usually buy their stuff? Because you're now able to more closely target your exact customer. The better your list is, the higher the percentage of sales are going to be per dollar you spend on advertising and marketing. It all comes back to knowing your customer in detail.